Today we're going to walk through the calibration of an ideal BAS-051 welder. The procedure we're going to be using is a paper copy that's very well documented and spells out each one of the steps as you go through to let you know exactly what you're adjusting. So for clarity, I've laid out some of the components that we're going to be working with underneath the cover of the machine, just to give you a better view of what you're going to be looking at. So the cam we're going to be working with looks like this. And you can see it's numbered 1 through 6. And this is your cam follower. During the procedure, we're going to be turning the motor fan to turn the cam to align the follower to a corresponding number. And then at that same time, we're going to be listening for this micro switch to trip from the actuator. This is the switch bar that's in your machine. This is the actuator that's going to trip it. And as you turn this, this is turning at the same time, and it's going to trip that switch. And that's when you're going to listen and come over here and validate that you're on that mark. If you are prior to the mark or after the mark when this switches, we're going to loosen this set screw right here, back it out, and slightly tap this in one direction or the other to make your correction so that you get a correspondence between the mark on the cam and the switch point on the switch. So let's go over to the machine and I'll show you what we're going to need for this operation. So I have my instructions. I'm going to place those right over here. For this operation, you're going to need a set of metric Allen wrenches. You may need a Phillips head screwdriver to remove the end bell if it has a set screw in there. I'm using a flathead screwdriver as a 4-man stethoscope so that I can hear the switch trip in a noisy environment. You're going to need 2 10mm Allen wrenches, a flashlight, and this block is actually a gauge that we manufactured. This is a 40 thousandths thick slab. This won't be used on this particular machine, but this process is suitable for 4 different variations of the machine: the 51, the 52, the 100, and the 120. So for the 120 being the largest of the machines, this will come into play in the adjustment of the automatic disconnect, and we'll show you that when we get to that step. So you won't need this for this machine, but you will need it if you have a BAS-120 and you're doing this calibration. So the first thing we need to do is expose the switch and the cams. And that's under this cover here. We're going to loosen, remove our securing screws that hold our cover down. So to do this procedure, it's not necessary to have the power on. So we could just take and turn this tap switch in the off position. The only thing you're going to need to have on to do this operation is your pre-pressure on this side of the machine. So your pre-pressure energizes the air to this cylinder that applies the pressure to this table to keep the cam against the follower. You're going to allow this to be in the on position for the majority of the operation. At one point, we're going to turn it off, and you'll see why at that time. So now that I've taken my screws off the top of the cover, I'm just going to lightly impact the lid here to break it free. Lift this cover off, place it on the side, and then I'm going to remove the end bell from the motor so that I have access to the fan to turn this for this procedure. So here you can see this is the cam. This is the follower that I showed you on the table. These are your trip, and these are your switches. This first cam is the starting position or the initial gap on your machine. You'll notice that there are two positions here, a position 3 and a position 4. If you have an insertion bar or a centering bar on your machine, then you want to make sure that this acorn nut is in position 3. If you do not have a centering bar, it would be located in position 4. So our first step is going to be validating that position. So I'm going to take and I'm going to back this cam off of that switch, and now I'm going to put on and listen for that click, and I'm going to turn it in the correct direction. And now I'm going to take my flashlight and I'm going to look for that corresponding alignment from the bottom of that cam that I showed you before to that number. That's what I'm looking for here. So in this position here, because we're in 3, my corresponding line is on 3. So I know that that's set correctly. So now we're going to be going to the weld current on. This is S9. We'll find that on here. Lift that up. Mark S9. And you can see I have the back of this marked with the corresponding function of that switch. Weld current on. So again, we're going to see where that trip is on that cam here. We want to move that to that switch position. I can move it quickly getting up there, but as soon as I see it touch, I want to stop, listen for that switch, and turn it very slowly till I hear that click. At that time, again, I'm going to look at my mark, and I want the bottom of that follower to be aligned with the mark on the cam. If everything is good, we move on to our next setting. This is the upset on, and this is going to be switch number S12. Just like before, find our S12, take a look where our trip is on there, and now I can quickly move until I see it just make contact with that switch, and I backed it off a little bit. And again, listen for it. Got my click. Come down here, look, and my mark is on my cam. The majority of the time that you're doing this calibration It's merely going to be a validation of the switching point. You rarely will have to adjust, but we'll show you how to adjust should that be necessary. So at this point, on this switch, this also corresponds to our next setting. So we're not going to move our switches at this time. Now we're going to check our automatic disconnect. This is the current cutout that shuts the voltage off to the jaws at the appropriate time. So these two work hand in hand. So again, for the BAS-51, 52, and 100, you're going to be adjusting it just as you see it here. If you're adjusting for a BAS-120, this 40 thousandths feeler gauge needs to be introduced into this area to add that value. But again, this is for a BAS-120 only. So this is a smaller machine. This is not going to be used. But again, if you have that BAS-120, this is where that would be used. So to do this adjustment, we're not going to turn the cam here. We're going to turn the dial on the side. If your machine still has the original switch that came with it, chances are it's going to have a clear cover, which makes it extremely easy because you can see the switch contact. And as I turn this out, you'll notice them switch into the open position, or the closed position, I apologize. And now when we turn it back, you see that switch point. You want that to be at 0. Let's just say, for the sake of discussion, that it was not. Okay? So this is where you're going to use your 10mm Allen wrenches. I'm going to break free the jam nut on the back side of this screw. That's a trip screw for this. And then I'm going to see at what point it trips at and adjust this as necessary to get it to trip right at 0. So if I come back, I come forward, there's my 0. I did not trip. So at this point, I'm going to turn this until I see it trip with this on 0. You saw that trip right there. So I'm going to take and hold this. I'm going to snug up the jam nut a little bit. Try to maintain that adjustment. And then take a look again. I'm going to open it. You saw the switch make contact. Now I'm going to bring it in the opposite direction very slowly. And we see that we stopped where it opened up right at 0. That's how you would adjust this switch if it were off. Now that I know that it's correct, I'm going to take and just snug that jam nut up a little bit without turning it and secure that position. So at this point, I'm going to shut off the pre-pressure on the machine for the next adjustment, okay? So if we come over to this side, I'm going to slide based on the model that you have. You're either going to have a slide switch like this, or you're going to have a petcock. So this one has a slide switch. I'm just going to discharge it, so now there's no pressure pushing against this table, okay? The reason why I do this is on the next step, we're going to be running the cam so that the follower falls off the edge while trying to listen for the S8 to trip. If I have the pre-pressure on, the noise of the upset will mask the trip of the switch. So in this case, we want to have no upset coming on so that we can hear our switch trip. So find my S8. Listen for my switch. And now I'm going to take and make a measurement. And we're measuring between the bottom of the follower and the flat of the upset on the cam. This is done, it's a 1.5 to 2 millimeter setting. So let's start with the 1.5, the smaller of the two. And I'm going to lay this on the top of the cam surface. And I'm going to take the follower and I'm going to pull it forward. And you can see that there's a loose fit with a 1.5 millimeter. Now I'm going to take my 2 millimeter and repeat the process. Put it flat. I'm going to pull this forward, and you can see that I have a slight interference fit. I can't get it to go over to 2 millimeter. So my adjustment here is somewhere between 1.5 and 2 millimeters. And if you look at our adjustment, there should be a gap of 1 to 2 millimeters between the upsetting cam position. So we have a 1.5 that went in and a 2 millimeter that did not. We're perfect. Our next adjustment is going to be our annealing with a long anneal. This is your wide anneal. That's switch S11. So again, I come over, identify where my switch is. I look for where my trip is, so I know how far I have to go, so I can quickly turn this. Until I get up to this position where I barely see it touch. Now I'm going to listen for my click. I'm going to look for my mark. And in this case, because I have the pre-pressure shut off, I'm going to pull this forward and look at it. And I can see that I'm off a little bit, okay? So it looks like I'm a little early. So to adjust this, I'm going to take a 4 millimeter Allen wrench. Here's my S11. I'm going to put the Allen wrench into this set screw that's keeping this tight. I'm going to back this off. You don't have to go crazy, just enough to get it to move. Now this cam is snug on this shaft, so it doesn't move very easily. So again, I tripped a little bit early, so I want to retard the setting or move this cam further away. So I'm just going to tap lightly on this side with the back end of the screwdriver. And you may not see it move, but I'm going to put my finger on it to get a feel for how much it did move. There, okay? Very subtle move. Generally speaking, these won't be a gross adjustment. Now tightening this, you'll notice that I'm only using the short end of the Allen wrench. These cams are plastic. This is a steel screw with a steel nut behind it. If you use the short end and over tighten these, you'll draw that nut right through. You'll split the casting on that and it will shut you down. You'll have to disassemble this whole assembly to make that correction. So be very cautious when tightening these. So now that I made my adjustment, I'm going to back that off and then again listen for my click. I'm going to look for my mark, and now I can see that my mark aligns perfectly with the bottom of my follower. So now we can go on to our next setting. Which is the short anneal. This is S10. And it's done in the exact same fashion. And it shows you the corresponding mark that you're looking for on this. So again, I'm going to look for my short distance, S10. Here's my trip. I can quickly move that lobe to that switch. See it starting moving, I back it off. Now I listen. I look for my mark. And we're good. So at this point, you've validated the operation of most of the switches, made a minor adjustment to the others. You can now bring the machine back to its home position and then put your cover back on and get ready for operation. So to get it back to its home position, I'm going to turn my power back on. I'm going to turn my pre-pressure back on. And then lastly, I'm going to press the initiate button on the panel, and that will drive the cam to its home position. When the light comes back on, you know you're in your home position. If you look at your cam bar, you can see you're in your home position. Your calibration is done on this machine. Now you can put it back together, make whatever adjustments are necessary for your camber alignment, set it up for your appropriate materials, and feel comfortable that you'll get a quality weld on a well-calibrated machine. Always make sure to restore all the safety guards that you removed to do this process, and that your screws have all been restored and tightened on your cover to ensure proper alignment and no movement in this side.